Some of the difference between these two texts is that the old version of the Rumpelstiltskin is more like a typical fairy tale, because many of the things that characterize fairy tales, like three elements, and the story starts with once upon a time and it ends with happily ever after, when all the problems get solved, compared to the modern version of the Rumpelstiltskin, which doesn't use many things of the fairy tale's elements. The modern version is more like a satire to the Me Too campaign, and there is also more focus on relevant things in the in a social context. For example, has the farmers not any relevance for the old version of Rumpelstiltskin, but in the modern version, is there more focus on the farmers because they help the miller's daughter, called Esmeralda, to fight the king after she gave them all the straw.
There is a very strong difference in the language of the two texts. An example is that in the first text the miller is referred to as poor, and in the second text he is referred to as economically disadvantaged. There is also an example where she asks Rumpelstiltskin if he is specially disabled instead of calling him stupid. The reason behind the difference between the two texts is that the first one is the old original text by the brothers Grimm, and the new text is rewritten to be more modern and sophisticated by James Garner. In the second text, the level of the language is very high compared to the original text. There's multiple examples of the words that are more formal than the words in the original text. It gives the second story a much more elegant language.
In this story, there's a lot of humor and criticism of these ultra-feminists that is upcoming in our modern society. And I have some examples from the text, and for example, that the fact that they say woman instead of woman, and woman instead of women. It is a very extreme feminism, and it is also funny that the miller, he is always looking for a quick way to become rich, I think, because it is very often used, and a very often used expression in Danish for when you want to make a little crime to earn some quick money. Another funny thing is when Esmeralda says, "What are you, especially abled or something?" Because that is like a modern way, or modern and sort of a nice way to ask if you're handicapped or stupid. And in one point of the story, the kingdom turned into a model democracy without economic or sexual injustice. And it's like the ultra perfect feminism world, I think. And Esmeralda also says that she will not let anybody interfere with her reproductive rights, and it has something to do with that she is a very strong and independent woman. In the end of the story, Esmeralda moves to California with all her gold, and she starts a birth control clinic. And at the birth control clinic, she showed other women, or as she called it, women, that they should not be enslaved by their reproductive system. So she lived to the end of her days as a single, dedicated, and happy person. And that's a funny ending if you compare it to the other ending where she was married to the king and became a queen, and in this story she just ends up single and dedicated to a job. And this whole story is actually just a satire for adults, and it is criticizing these upcoming reformations with like vegans and ultra-feminists. And Esmeralda is a great example of a woman who doesn't want to let anybody control her in her life. She's like a strong and independent woman, and she has her own rights, just as equal as men.
Some of the difference between these two texts is the feminism. In the older text, some of the oppression of women, but typically when the king follows the girl into the room and told her that she had to spend all the straw into gold, and if she hadn't spent it all, she will die. Later in the story, she ended up talking with a little guy named Rumpelstiltskin. He offers to help her with the straw because he said that he can make it become gold. In return, she must give him a ring
which is a sign of marriage, which she must also give him a necklace, which is a sign of a necklace for a dog. Finally, she must give him her firstborn child. In the new text, the girl is called Esmeralda. Also in the story, she got locked into the room where she got to spin the straw into gold. In the room, she also ends up talking to the little guy Rumpelstiltskin, who is telling her that it isn't possible to turn the straw into gold. But if she gave all the straw she got from the king to the farmers, then the straw would turn into gold because the kids will grow strong and tall so they can topple the king out of the kingdom. Rumpelstiltskin only wants to help her if she gives him her firstborn child. But Esmeralda doesn't want to, which symbolizes that she is a strong and independent woman. Rumpelstiltskin says that Esmeralda has to guess his name. It symbolized that there isn't so much oppression of women in the text because Esmeralda got a new opportunity after she said no to get her firstborn child away. In the older text, she ends up married to the king, which also tells us that there is a lot of repression of women. But in the new text, the girl starts a birth control clinic where she was helping women to get more independent and to be a feminist. The two texts is so different because the older texts have a lot of oppression of women, and the new text is about feminism and how women also can be strong and independent.
If we insert the original story in the contract model, the contract would be made when Rumpelstiltskin has to turn the straw into gold for the daughter in exchange for her necklace and ring. The contract is broken when she promised him her baby but wouldn't give it to him. She now has to guess his name if she wants to keep the baby. She sent a messenger into the outworld to find out his name, and when she finally guesses Rumpelstiltskin's name, she passes the test. In this story, the contract is not remade because Rumpelstiltskin tore himself into two. In the second story, the contract is made with the king that she can turn the straw into gold. The contract is broken when she can't do the task. Then she goes into the outworld to the farmers and gives them the straw so they can get a drier home and be more productive. The kingdom turned into a model democracy, and Esmeralda was given a gift of gold for her generous deed, and by that she's passing the test. In this story, the contract is not remade because the king has been stabbed to death.
If the text were put into the actual model, would the Miller's daughter be the subject because she is the main character, and the whole story is about her? The object could be that she needs to make all the straw to gold over the night, and the helper is Rumpelstiltskin because he gave her the offer that he would make all the straw to gold if she would give something back. And that is also why Rumpelstiltskin is the opponent, because he wants to take the child the first time. The center in this story is the miller because he sent his daughter to the king. And in the end, is the miller's daughter the receiver because she gets to keep the child and she became queen.